I'm Paige Turner, 29 years old, and I work in marketing in Colorado Springs. For a while, I stayed in the guest house behind my parents' home, putting money aside for my own place while contributing $1,500 each month toward their mortgage. A mutual agreement that worked for both sides. Everything stayed balanced until my younger brother turned up broke, buried under party expenses and gambling losses. Almost overnight, my parents expected me to rescue him financially, insisting it was my duty to keep the family afloat while he continued his reckless spending. I refused, but they kept pushing, repeating the same line, that we were supposed to stand together no matter what. One evening, things boiled over. My father's face went crimson as he shouted, "Get out and don't come back." My chest tightened as I understood that he meant it, and so did I. I packed my things, walked out, and didn't look back. A few weeks later, my mother called in a panic, demanding to know why I'd stopped sending the mortgage payments. What I told her ended the conversation immediately. Want to know what I said? Stay tuned. It only gets crazier from here. Let me know where you're watching, hit like, and subscribe to catch the rest of this family chaos. Before everything fell apart, life had a rhythm. My brother Noah appeared out of nowhere one day, carrying a duffel bag and a pile of excuses. I'd been focused on my career at a local advertising agency, spending long hours refining campaigns, coordinating client pitches, and managing a major regional account. Every paycheck went straight toward my savings for a future home, though I also covered $1,500 a month for my parents' mortgage, the price of staying in the guest house rent-free. It wasn't luxurious, but it kept me moving toward independence. Late nights found me at my desk, fine-tuning ad copy or analyzing reports, always keeping my dream in sight. My days followed the same pattern: work, save, repeat. I even skipped my usual coffee stops just to stretch every dollar. Everything was running smoothly until my brother came storming back into our lives. After losing his bartending gig in Denver, he turned up at our door smelling of cheap cologne and carrying a mountain of debt I could hardly process. He'd wasted thousands on flashy clothes, online gambling, and buying drinks for random people. I overheard him boasting about an $800 leather jacket while I was barely managing to keep up with the mortgage payments. There was no apology, only that familiar smirk as he insisted he'd handle it soon. I wanted to believe him, but I'd seen this routine before, ever since he was 19 and constantly borrowing money from our parents, Gary and Cheryl Turner, for so-called emergencies that usually meant concerts or nights out. One evening over dinner, I tried to keep my voice steady as I said, "He needs to find work. We can't keep cleaning up after him." Mom's expression hardened as she placed her fork on the table and replied softly, "He's having a tough time. We're a family. We'll get through this together." Dad's expression hardened, his jaw tight, as though I were the unreasonable one at the table. My parents had always treated my brother like he was untouchable, their golden child who could never really mess up. I'd always been the dependable one, the one who handled responsibilities, so naturally, they assumed I'd clean up his latest disaster. They never came out and said it, but the message was unmistakable. I should use my savings to rescue him. The thought made my stomach twist. I'd spent years building that nest egg, and I wasn't about to watch it vanish because of his recklessness. Still, the pressure kept coming. Mom began slipping in daily reminders about family loyalty, and how a bit of help could give him the boost he needed to recover. Dad didn't bother with subtlety. "You're doing great at work," he'd remind me, as if my paycheck existed for everyone's use but mine. I tried to explain that my savings were meant for my future, not for covering my brother's losses, but it never landed. Every discussion ended in the same loop. Them defending him, me swallowing my frustration to avoid another fight. Even work started to feel heavier. The marketing campaign I was leading had an impossible deadline, and I was already running on fumes. One afternoon, distracted by Mom's latest guilt-laced phone call, I botched a client meeting and mixed up the budget figures. My boss pulled me aside afterward, concern written all over his face, asking if everything was okay. I forced a reassuring smile and said it was, though it couldn't have been further from the truth. I'd sit at my desk staring blankly at spreadsheets, doing silent math in my head. How long could I keep paying my parents' mortgage while my brother kept bleeding us dry? The savings account I'd once been so proud of had stopped growing entirely. Every time I logged in to check the balance, resentment pricked at me a little deeper. I tried reasoning with my brother, hoping he might finally take responsibility. One evening, I found him stretched out on the couch, eyes fixed on his phone. "You've got to stop spending," I said as calmly as I could. "I'm not bailing you out this time." He barely glanced up, mumbling about some job he was about to land. I pushed for details, how much he owed, to whom, and when he planned to pay it off. He just shrugged, claimed everything was handled, and immediately started talking about a party he'd gone to. My hands trembled as I walked away, realizing he was spinning the same old lies. The guest house that had once felt like my peaceful space now seemed suffocating. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to the low hum of the heater, wondering how I'd become the family's safety net. Mom and Dad's favorite mantra echoed in my head: "We're all in this together." But it didn't feel like we. It felt like me, fighting his chaos while they stood behind him, cheering him on. I kept up the same routine, working, saving, covering the mortgage, but the pressure was wearing me down. Something had to break. About a week after my failed conversation with him, a strange credit card bill arrived. It was tucked in with the usual guest house mail, addressed to me but from a bank I'd never even used. My hands trembled as I tore the envelope open. Inside was a credit card statement showing nearly $5,000 in charges, bar tabs, online gaming transactions, even a car rental I'd never used. The account was in my name, linked to my social security number, but I'd never applied for it. My stomach twisted. There was no doubt who had. My brother's reckless habits had finally spilled over onto me, and now my credit, my future, was on the line. I marched straight to the main house, the statement clenched in my fist. He was in the kitchen, casually microwaving leftovers like nothing was wrong. "You used my name?" I demanded, my voice low but cutting. "You opened a credit card and blew through $5,000? Are you out of your mind?" He froze for a second, then leaned against the counter with a shrug. "It's not a big deal," he said with a smirk. "I just needed some quick cash. I'll take care of it." His arrogance ignited something in me. "Take care of it?" I snapped. "You've wrecked my credit. This is fraud." He rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. "You've got money," he muttered. "Just cover it for now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wasn't only dodging blame, he was pinning it on me. I stepped closer, my voice shaking but firm. "You're fixing this. Call the bank and tell them what you did, or I will." His smirk vanished, replaced by a glare. "You're so selfish," he shot back. "Always acting like you're better than me." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. "This isn't about me," I said steadily. "You crossed a line. Fix it, or I'll report you myself." He grabbed his plate and stalked off, muttering under his breath. I stood in the kitchen, my heart pounding, realizing how deep his betrayal ran. My name, my identity had been dragged into his mess, and it was worse than I'd ever feared. That night, I called the bank, forcing my voice to stay calm even as panic tightened in my chest. The representative confirmed the account had been opened 3 weeks earlier, using my personal details. I told them it wasn't me, and they marked it as fraud, urging me to freeze my credit immediately. For hours I sat at my computer, locking down everything with Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Each click a reminder of how far his carelessness had gone. It wasn't just about money anymore. My entire future was at risk. If my credit collapsed, the home I'd been saving for could disappear, all while I was still paying $1,500 a month for my parents' mortgage. The next morning, I brought everything to Mom and Dad, hoping they'd finally understand how serious it was. We sat together in the living room, the silence between us thick enough to choke on. I spread the statement across the coffee table and calmly explained what had happened. The fraud, the $5,000 in charges, the stolen identity. "He used my information," I said evenly. "This could destroy my credit. You need to make him stop." Mom's face crumpled, her fingers twisting together. "He didn't mean to," she murmured. "He's just under pressure." I stared, stunned. Dad leaned forward, his jaw tight. "You're overreacting," he said. "Pay it off, and we'll deal with him later." The words hit like a slap. They weren't just defending him. They were brushing aside the fact that he'd committed identity theft and jeopardized my future. "You're not hearing me," I said, my voice rising. "This isn't about money. He broke the law." Mom shook her head, eyes glassy. "Don't say that about your brother," she whispered. Dad's gaze hardened. "You've got a good job," he said. "You can manage this. Stop creating drama. The injustice burned. I was the one keeping their mortgage paid, holding the household together, and somehow I'd become the villain for standing up for myself. I left the room, my hands shaking, the statement still clenched in my grip. Once again, they'd taken his side. Work was the only place that still felt like mine, but even that was slipping. My boss had just given me a major opportunity to lead a national campaign, a chance to prove I was ready for a senior strategist role. The pitch was due in 10 days, but my concentration was shot, torn apart by the chaos at home. I stayed late most nights, staring at mock-ups that blurred together while my mind replayed the scene, the fraudulent charges, Mom's excuses, Dad's dismissal. During a team meeting, I stumbled over a question about the budget projections. My thoughts stuck on the fraud report I'd filed. My boss gave me a puzzled look, and I forced a smile, promising to circle back. I couldn't afford to let this derail me. Back at the guest house, I paced, the walls closing in. My brother's betrayal wasn't just painful. It was clarifying. I couldn't keep living like this, under their roof, bound by their loyalty to him. The space that had once symbolized progress now felt like a trap. I'd secured my credit for now, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he did something worse. My parents' refusal to hold him accountable said everything. They'd always expect me to clean up his chaos, to sacrifice my future for his failures. The thought of staying, of enduring that cycle, made my skin crawl. I needed out, even if it meant starting over from scratch. A few days later, Dad called for a family meeting. The moment I stepped into the living room, tension thick in the air, I knew something was coming, and it wasn't good. Mom sat hunched on the couch, her fingers twisting nervously, while my brother lounged in an armchair, phone in hand, completely detached from the moment. Dad stood near the window, his expression carved in stone, the fading Colorado Springs light stretching long shadows behind him. "We've got a problem," he said, his tone low but cutting. "Your brother's in deep again. $10,000 gone on gambling and shopping. You're going to cover it, Paige, or you're out of the guest house." The word slammed into me. $10,000, on top of the credit disaster he'd already caused. My head spun, but I forced my voice steady. "I'm not paying for his mess. I've done more than enough for this family." My hands trembled, but I didn't back down. My brother didn't even look up, still scrolling like none of it concerned him. Mom's voice finally broke the silence, soft and trembling. "He's trying, Paige. He just needs a little help to get back on his feet. Family looks out for family." Her words twisted like a knife. "Sacrifices?" I snapped, the edge in my voice sharper than I intended. "I've been the one making sacrifices for years, keeping this place afloat. When does he take responsibility?" Dad's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "You've got a good job," he said flatly. "You can afford it. Stop turning this into a battle." The injustice burned through me. I turned to my brother, who finally lifted his gaze, bored and smug. "You're dragging all of us down," I said, voice shaking. "You blew 10 grand and I'm supposed to fix it? Explain yourself." He gave a lazy shrug, leaning back in the chair. "Not my fault things got rough," he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. "You just think you're better than everyone." His words hit like a slap, but I refused to let them land. "This isn't about me," I fired back. "You've crossed a line, and I'm done cleaning up after you." He rolled his eyes and returned to his phone, tuning me out completely. I turned to Dad, desperate for reason. "He's not even trying," I said. "Why am I the one paying the price?" Dad stepped forward, his voice suddenly booming. "Because you're part of this family," he shouted. "Either you help or you pack your things and go, and don't come back." The room fell silent. Mom gasped, reaching for his arm, but he shook her off. My heart pounded, the betrayal sinking in. I'd expected a fight, but not an ultimatum, not a demand to sacrifice my future or lose my home. Tears stung my eyes, not from grief, but from the raw ache of realization. Once again, they'd chosen him over me. Mom tried to ease the tension, her voice trembling. "Paige, please," she murmured. "We just need to stay united. He'll figure things out eventually." I shook my head, my throat tight with frustration. "You're not helping him," I said. "You're enabling him. You're letting him drag us all down, and I'm the one paying the price." My eyes shifted to my brother, still glued to his phone, oblivious to the chaos around him. "You don't even care," I said, my voice breaking. He didn't answer, didn't even glance up. I turned and left, each step echoing against the hardwood floor. When I got back to the guest house, the air felt heavier, colder. The demand, $10,000 to clean up his mess, pressed on me like a weight I couldn't carry anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed, my thoughts spinning. Years of contributions, months of covering the mortgage, all the sacrifices I'd made, none of it mattered. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was a safety net. My brother's debts, his careless detachment, their endless excuses. It was a loop I'd never escape as long as I stayed. The guest house that once represented stability had become a trap, anchoring me to their dysfunction. I thought about my work, the campaign I was leading, the promotion I'd been fighting for. Staying would cost more than money. It would cost my peace, my future, maybe even my sense of self. I grabbed my phone and called Lindsay Wade, my closest friend since college. Her voice came through, warm and grounding. "Paige, talk to me. What's going on?" she asked. Everything came pouring out. Dad's ultimatum, the 10 grand, my brother's indifference, Mom's pleading. My voice cracked as I said the words out loud. They chose him over me. Lindsay didn't hesitate. "You don't deserve that," she said firmly. "You need to get out, Paige. For good." Her words landed with force, echoing the truth I'd been avoiding. Staying meant repeating the same heartbreak. More guilt, more demands, more of myself slipping away. I took a deep breath, staring at the walls that once felt safe, but now felt suffocating. Leaving would hit my savings. I'd have to start over, but staying would cost far more. My sanity, my independence, my peace. "Can we talk tomorrow?" I asked, my voice steadier now. "I need to plan how to leave." "Any time," she said without hesitation. "I'm here." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than exhaustion, a flicker of hope. The guest house wasn't my home anymore. It was the chain I was finally ready to break. Dad's ultimatum had drawn the line, but I was the one who would decide where to stand. The next morning, I met Lindsay at a coffee shop downtown to plan my escape. The place hummed with conversation and the smell of espresso, but all I could hear were Dad's words from the night before, his ultimatum echoing in my head. I laid everything out for her, the $10,000, the screaming, the feeling of being completely abandoned by my own family. Lindsay leaned in, eyes steady and voice firm. "You can't keep living like that," she said. "They're taking advantage of you. Move in with me. My apartment's small, but I've got space." Her offer hit me like air after drowning. I hadn't even considered it before, but suddenly the thought of moving in with her felt like freedom, a real way out. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, mentally crunching the numbers. Sharing rent with Lindsay would cost around $1,000 a month, nearly half of what I was paying toward my parents' mortgage. I'd still need to keep up the $1,500 until I fully disentangled myself. But it was a start. My savings, meant for a down payment on a home, would take a hit. I'd been so close, maybe a year away from buying a place. Now, leaving meant delaying that dream by another year or two. But staying meant more guilt, more fights, and more of my brother's chaos consuming everything I'd worked for. I looked across the table at Lindsay's concerned face and nodded. "It's worth it," I said quietly. "I have to get out." Later at work, I grabbed lunch with Colin Hayes, a colleague who'd turned into a trusted friend. Between bites of his sandwich, I told him everything. Dad's demand, the fight, the ultimatum. Colin frowned, shaking his head. "You're doing amazing here," he said. "You've got a real shot at that senior strategist role. Don't let them pull you down." His words grounded me. My job was the only area where I wasn't constantly failing someone else's expectations. "You're right," I said. "It's time I start focusing on my own life." Colin smiled, his tone calm but certain. "Leaving's the right move, Paige. You've got this." That conversation sealed it. Over the next few days, I began quietly preparing to leave, careful not to alert my family. I spent evenings scrolling through rental listings, narrowing my options to Lindsay's apartment and a small studio nearby in case her roommate situation changed. Her one-bedroom in central Colorado Springs was cozy, walking distance from the agency, and affordable if I tightened my budget. At night, I packed in silence, clothes into duffel bags, books into boxes, all labeled storage, so my brother wouldn't snoop. Each piece I packed felt like a small reclaiming of control. Meanwhile, nothing in the main house had changed. Mom and Dad carried on like nothing had happened, and my brother drifted through his days without a care. I called a local moving service and booked a small van for the end of the week. The guy on the phone quoted me $400 for a quick trip across town, a small price to pay for freedom. I winced at the thought of dipping into my savings, but the expense felt like a small price for freedom. To avoid suspicion, I kept my usual routine: breakfast with Mom, quick check-ins with Dad about work. Even a polite smile tossed my brother's way. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, I was unraveling, second-guessing everything. What if I couldn't manage rent? What if my career stumbled just when I needed it most? But every time doubt crept in, I replayed Dad's words. Sharp, final, echoing in my head. Get out. I refused to stay where I wasn't wanted. Lindsay and I coordinated everything over late-night texts. She sent me her lease agreement to look over, promised to clear half her closet for my things. We'll make it fun, she wrote, peppering her message with cheerful emojis. Her steady optimism kept me anchored. I also visited my bank to untangle myself from the family's joint account. The teller guided me through the process of closing access, ensuring my brother couldn't touch another cent of my money. When I walked out, it felt like snapping the last chain. By Friday, everything was lined up. A new address, a budget, a moving date. I'd move in with Lindsay, split rent, and start rebuilding from the ground up. The guest house that once represented safety now felt like an anchor I was finally ready to release. I was terrified, but beneath the fear was something stronger, the quiet pulse of control returning to my life. Saturday morning arrived calm and gray. The house was empty. My parents and brother had left for a cousin's wedding, just as I'd planned. I stood alone in the guest house, heart pounding but steady, knowing this was my moment. Lindsay's old hatchback pulled into the driveway, followed by Colin in a rented moving van, the engine humming low. We had a narrow window, hours before my family returned. I'd planned everything down to the minute. Only the essentials were coming: clothes, a few books, my laptop, and a small box of keepsakes. The rest, old furniture, decor, pieces of a life that no longer fit, I left behind without a second thought. It felt like shedding a version of myself I'd outgrown. Lindsay stepped inside and wrapped me in a quick hug, her tone bright but sure. "Let's get this done," she said, grabbing one of the duffel bags. Colin rolled up his sleeves, already lifting boxes into the van. "You're doing the right thing," he said, setting my laptop case gently in the back. Their calm energy kept me steady as we worked. We moved quickly through a light drizzle, our shoes splashing against the driveway as the van filled in under an hour. I kept glancing toward the main house, half expecting my brother to appear, but it stayed silent. By noon, everything was packed. The 15-minute drive to Lindsay's apartment in central Colorado Springs felt like crossing a border, leaving behind chaos and stepping into clarity. Her place buzzed with warmth and the smell of coffee. Colin hauled the last boxes up the narrow stairwell, laughing about how this counted as his weekend workout. Lindsay cleared half her closet, pushing hangers aside. "Plenty of space," she said with a grin. By 3 o'clock, everything was unpacked. Clothes hung neatly, books stacked on a borrowed shelf, my laptop open on the kitchen counter. For the first time in months, I exhaled without fear. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a space free from the constant weight of family demands. When I returned to the guest house for one final trip, the silence was almost deafening. The walls were bare, the air hollow. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of loss, not for the building itself, but for the version of life I'd once imagined here. I brushed the thought aside and sat at the small desk, pulling out a single sheet of paper. My hand trembled as I began to write. "Mom and Dad," I started, "I'm gone. I've been paying $1,500 a month toward your mortgage, but you told me to leave. I'm not responsible for this family anymore. Not for my brother's mistakes, not for his debts. I'm done." The note was short, deliberate, and impossible to misunderstand. I folded it neatly, placed it on the desk, and turned the key in the lock behind me. The sound of the door clicking shut felt final, like closing the cover on a chapter that had run too long. As I drove away, a rush of relief flooded through me, loosening the knot that had lived in my chest for months. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Lindsay's apartment wasn't a dream home, but it was mine, a clean slate where I owed nothing to anyone. I imagined my savings finally safe from the drain of my brother's chaos. The sting of my parents' loyalty to him still lingered, but it was fading with every mile I put between us. In the rearview mirror, the guest house shrank until it disappeared entirely. I let out a shaky laugh. I'd done it. I was free. But as the adrenaline wore off, a flicker of unease crept in. What would happen when they got back? Mom's tears, Dad's fury, my brother's indifference. I could already picture it all. Dad accusing me of betrayal, Mom begging me to come home. Would they even read my letter? Would they care? I shoved the thoughts away and focused on the road ahead. Lindsay and Colin were waiting, ready to toast my escape with greasy pizza and laughter. That would be enough for tonight. When I pulled into the apartment lot, the van's engine ticked softly as it cooled. Lindsay leaned over the balcony, waving with a grin. Colin was already inside, setting up a spare chair for me. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the one I chose. Imperfect, maybe, but wholly mine. The letter lingered in my mind like an echo. Every word of it had been true. My family had drawn their line, and I'd drawn mine. The road ahead was uncertain, but it finally felt like it belonged to me. 3 weeks later, that illusion shattered. My phone lit up with a string of frantic messages from Mom. "Paige, we're in trouble," the first one said. "The bank's threatening to foreclose. Please call." I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold on the kitchen counter. They'd read the letter, finally realizing I'd stopped paying the $1,500 a month toward their mortgage. A notice from the bank had arrived. 30 days to pay, or they'd lose the house. My stomach clenched, not from guilt, but from a strange blend of pity and finality. I'd carried them for too long, and now they were feeling the weight I'd been shouldering for years. That evening, Mom called, her voice quivering through the receiver. "Paige, we need you," she said. "Just pay the mortgage a little longer. We'll figure something out." I stood by the window of my apartment, gazing out at the Colorado Springs skyline twinkling below. My voice stayed calm, though my pulse raced. "You told me to leave," I said evenly. "I'm not responsible for your decisions, or his." She started pleading, words spilling over themselves. "Your brother's trying. He just needs more time." "I'm done fixing his mistakes," I interrupted. "You made your choice." Then I hung up. My heart pounded, but the air around me felt lighter, like a door had finally shut for good. News trickled back to me through a cousin a few days later. My brother hadn't changed. He was still avoiding work, burning through credit cards, and letting Mom and Dad scramble to cover his bills. Their finances were unraveling fast. Overdue notices stacked up for everything from the mortgage to utilities, car payments, even the gambling debts he swore he'd paid off. The $10,000 Dad had demanded from me had just been the beginning. My brother's recklessness had driven them even deeper into the hole. According to my cousin, the bank's foreclosure warning was no bluff. Their home was on the verge of being seized. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness, imagining Mom's sleepless nights and Dad's growing frustration. But I forced myself to stop there. They'd made their bed. They'd chosen to enable him. And now the consequences were theirs to face. The same cousin later told me the tension at home had exploded. Mom and Dad were fighting constantly, something unheard of before. He said the shouting could be heard through the walls. Dad blaming Mom for coddling my brother. Mom accusing Dad of driving me away. Their perfect family front was cracking fast. Dad was ready to cut my brother off completely, to make him stand on his own. Mom refused, saying he just needed another chance. Their once solid marriage was fracturing under the weight of his chaos, and my brother, oblivious as ever, went on spending, promising change that never came. While they sank deeper, I was rebuilding. Lindsay's small apartment had become a sanctuary. The creaky floors, chipped mugs, and mismatched furniture somehow warmer than the guest house had ever been. At work, I'd thrown myself into the new campaign. Long nights, endless revisions, and a nerve-wracking pitch meeting that left my palms damp. But it paid off. The client loved it, and a week later, my boss called me into her office. "You're our new senior strategist," she said, smiling in that rare way she saved for big wins. The promotion came with a raise, enough to start rebuilding my savings and finally breathe easier. As I walked out of her office, pride swelled in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was moving forward. I hadn't spoken to my parents or my brother since that last call. I'd blocked their numbers, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Every message, every please had felt like bait, an attempt to drag me back into the storm I'd finally escaped. Lindsay kept reminding me I'd made the right choice. One night, over cartons of takeout and laughter that felt easy for the first time in years, she said, "You're thriving, Paige. Don't let them pull you down again." Colin was the same at work. When he heard about my promotion, he grinned and slapped my hand in celebration. Their faith in me was a steady reminder that I didn't need my family's approval to be whole. Looking back, the truth was crystal clear. Setting boundaries hadn't been cruel, it had been necessary. My family had used guilt to keep me tethered, making their problems mine, and I'd finally broken that cycle. Their choices, enabling my brother, dismissing my efforts, had brought them exactly where they were. The looming foreclosure, the arguments tearing their home apart, those were no longer my burdens to carry. I felt stronger not because I'd won, but because I'd finally chosen myself. My new life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Steady, peaceful, and built on my own terms. To everyone who's followed my story, thank you for staying with me. Walking away from family is never simple, but sometimes it's the only path to protecting your sanity and your peace. What about you? What would you have done in my place? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support means everything.